Tonight, we're taking you inside our year-long investigation into the problems and failures at the Cleveland Police Department. Those problems led to a Department of Justice investigation and the subsequent consent decree that lays out the changes the city must make.
We've told you about Tanisha Anderson, a mentally ill woman who died while in police custody 1 year ago. But we've uncovered evidence that the problem extends back years, and it's not only costing lives, but millions in taxpayer dollars. Investigator Sarah Buttison shows us serious flaws in the systems meant to get rid of problem police officers.
If you think getting arrested, getting caught using cocaine, or stealing from your employer will get you fired, you're probably right. But we found that's not what happens if you're a Cleveland police officer and answer to the people who work here. It was a busy July 4th weekend in 2011. When on-duty Cleveland police officer Matthew Kraska left his assigned patrol area to pick up his friend, off-duty officer Dave Mindek. The pair headed to Parma on a mission to find missing jewelry. They ended up here outside the quaint home on the corner of Wareham Drive that Tiffany Urbach shared with her fiancé Daniel Ficker and their 2 young children.
They should have never been at my house that night.
Earlier that day, Tiffany and Daniel were at a party at Mindek's house. Mindek accused Ficker of stealing necklaces belonging to his wife.
He immediately became irate and yelling.
Tiffany says Kraska grabbed Ficker. They fought. Kraska pulled out his taser. The brutal battle left Ficker with bruises all over his body.
I remember seeing blood.
And then a gunshot.
I dropped my phone and ran to his side.
Kraska fired a fatal shot into Ficker's chest.
What did you say to him?
That he was going to be all right and that I loved him.
How hard was that?
Hardest thing in my life.
Internal affairs investigators concluded the officers violated numerous police department policies.
They should have been fired immediately.
But they weren't. The city struck a deal with the union to delay discipline until the Ficker family's lawsuit is settled. They never faced discipline.
What effect does that have on the culture?
Well, it has a terrible effect on the culture. Again, it says you can do these things and keep your job.
Sam Walker is a police accountability expert.
I want to focus on the problem of disrespectful and offensive language.
He recently testified before President Obama's task force on 21st century policing and knows Cleveland well. He grew up in Cleveland Heights.
What kind of police department is Cleveland?
Well, getting pretty close to the bottom. It's an embarrassment.
Most troubling, the department's inability to deal with officers like Kraska and Mindek.
It means the people in the city of Cleveland are not getting good service.
NewsChannel5 investigators conducted an extensive review of CPD's disciplinary decisions during 2014. The 144 officers brought up on internal charges included an officer indicted for stealing from the department, an officer charged with assault after beating a man while off duty, and 3 who pled guilty to drunk driving. We also found 3 more officers were accused of drinking on the job. A 4th tested positive for marijuana and cocaine.
Somebody with alcohol and drug history, that person should not be working as a police officer.
They still are.
Shouldn't be.
Another challenge, when an officer is fired, it doesn't always stick. Between 2010 and 2014, 7 officers filed grievances with an arbitrator after being fired. 6 got their jobs back, including Shani Hanna. She was convicted of assault after she stabbed her boyfriend in the legs and arms during a drunken fight.
It's almost inherent in the arbitration process that the arbitrator wants to split the baby, give each side a little something. If it's a termination, that officer's going to get his or her job back.
There is a need for reform.
Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson has complained about arbitration, but has defended the department in the wake of a federal investigation that identified several systemic deficiencies, including insufficient accountability.
The mayor has never admitted or said that there is a pattern in practice.
Well, I think the mayor's in denial.
Walker says the solutions are no secret. On the West Coast, the LA Sheriff's Department uses an early intervention system to identify officers with performance problems. And on the East Coast, Washington, D.C. has an agency devoted to examining problems in their police department. But Walker says improvements will only happen if Jackson and Cleveland's leaders commit to change.
It's really a historic moment, and the question is, will Cleveland seize that moment or not?
Just a whole different life that I feel we're living now. Having to explain to, teachers and friends, and why isn't, where's their dad, all that. It's torture.
In the meantime, Tiffany avoids reading any news about Cleveland police. She says she doesn't want her children to see how angry it makes her.
What makes you so angry?
Just knowing that they're all getting away with all this. Not just Mendeck and Kraska, but the other, all the other shootings or beatings, they're all getting away with it.
What about the officers involved in the November 2012 police chase and shooting? 3 years later, we are still waiting to find out if the 13 officers who fired their guns will get into any trouble. We are also still waiting to find out if the 2 officers involved in 12-year-old Tamir Rice's death will be disciplined. It was not the first time Cleveland police have been involved in a confrontation with a child. Kristen Volk, you learned of a victim who was not only a teenager, but one with a disability.
I've been digging into court cases and lawsuits looking for the pattern involving Cleveland officers. And I uncovered the story of a Cleveland teenager with Down syndrome who was chased down by police when they mistook him for a robbery suspect.
911, what is your emergency? I just was robbed.
A call for help sent police on the trail.
He threatened to kill me. I could probably describe him. It was a white male, about 5'8" at the most.
But who did they nab? Meet Juan Ortiz, 16 at the time. He stands 5 foot 2 inches.
I'll keep it.
And he has Down syndrome. Police handcuffed him for robbery.
I had to suffer a lot watching that. Very hard for me watching him, looking at me, trying to say something or trying to say help me, and I couldn't even do nothing.
Juan's dad, Ramon, hopelessly watched his son get arrested by 2 Cleveland cops, Brian Casimir and Dan Crisson. With his disability, Juan had no idea what was going on. It all went down here, outside of this West Side apartment complex where the Ortiz family used to live. August 16th, 2010.
Kept hollering, you got the wrong one. That's not right. He's not the one. But still happened.
Nina Kennedy, the manager of the complex, witnessed the whole thing.
It scared me so bad.
She says officers Casimir and Crisson pinned Juan to a hot, running car in the heat of the summer for at least a half hour. Then she says the cops yelled at Juan's parents.
If you can't speak English here, take your ass back to where you come from. That's pretty much what they said. But they also used the F word.
What they did, it was awful.
Juan ended up in the hospital. His injuries, minor, but the emotional trauma, much deeper. The day after, Ramon filed this complaint against the officers here with Cleveland's Civilian Police Review Board. But we found that the system to address citizen complaints like Ramon's lacks transparency and efficiency. And those complaints languish in a maze of bureaucracy and finger-pointing.
Please, if they could discipline these officers and stop them from working in the streets, I will be happy on that part.
Just 2.5 months after the incident, the review board did recommend discipline for officers Casimir and Crisson in this charge letter dated November 9th, 2010. Here, the board called for a simple written reprimand and re-instruction. It stated that the cops handcuffed Juan and yelled to his parents, "You're lucky we didn't shoot him. Shut the F up."
That file came to the chief's office for discipline in July of the following year, 2011.
Mike McGrath was Cleveland's police chief at the time. He says it took 8 months for him to get that letter, prepared by the board's sister agency, the Office of Professional Standards, or OPS.
Why it took that long to come out of the Office of Professional Standards, I don't know.
He wouldn't know. We discovered ourselves that the review board operates under a cloud of ambiguity, and so does OPS, which investigates complaints made against police. Damon Scott leads the agency.
When anyone looks at this looks like you haven't done much of anything. Look at all these, a whole page worth of blank spaces here. No decision.
Well, that is something that my office is addressing.
These documents, which list those complaints and the status of the investigation, show the board has only ruled on 46 of 509 cases in the last 2 years.
Part of the reason that I was hired was to address some of the cases that were not investigated or that were dormant prior to my tenure.
That's what Scott told me a year ago. And 2 months ago, when we tried to ask him about the lack of improvement, he would not sit down with us.
Is there anything you would like me to use in the story or say in the story regarding why there doesn't seem to be any progress made here with complaints and the rulings on complaints?
And as for the review board,
because of the number of cases that the Office of Professional Standards receives each month, we are not able to address each case as it comes in.
Thomas Jones, the board's chairman, first claimed he and his 6 colleagues just can't keep up with the workload, then later backtracked.
So you have all of these cases, most of these cases in here that you have yet to decide on?
I don't know. I have not looked at these cases. Like I said, some of them may have been disposed of at this point, but may not have been posted.
Between the review board, OPS, and Cleveland Police, 5 years later, the Ortizes still wait for closure. And this charge letter still goes unanswered.
They're not doing nothing. They're not really doing nothing.
Ramon tells me the very sight of a police officer still triggers a terrifying flashback in his son.
He goes wild. He goes very wild at nighttime.
Ramon has flashbacks of his own, visions of the moment when he says the officers held his son down.
Even when I was saying to him, he's a Down syndrome, he's a child. He didn't pay attention. He seems to enjoy what he was doing.
At the time, the officers didn't know he had Down syndrome. Afterwards, we found out that he had Down syndrome.
Did this case slip through the cracks?
No, I don't believe so.
On behalf of the officers, the city says it has no comment because the case is ongoing. But for the first time, the Cleveland Police Department apologized to Juan and his family.
It was a mistake by the Division of Police.
Officers Casimir and Christen are still on the Cleveland police force. The Ortiz family sued them 4 years ago, at the same time that former Chief McGrath tells me he was notified of the review board's decision to discipline the officers. Because the two coincided, any discipline has yet to happen, because when the lawsuit was filed, the city tells me it was their policy to hold off on discipline while all pending civil and criminal matters are settled.
There are programs in place to help train officers in handling the mentally ill.
But experts we talked to call Cleveland's implementation substandard. Still ahead this hour, we take you to Memphis, Tennessee, to learn how a city best known for its blues became the nation's leading center for training police on how to interact with the mentally ill.
Plus, what will the changes required to improve our police force cost you? How will it play out on our streets? And when will we see change? Cleveland, not the first city to face federal reforms. So coming up, we go to Detroit to learn how that city is changing its force and the cost to taxpayers.